right, welcome to the MNFurs 2020 election. My name is Eric, and with me I have Drake. And on behalf of us on the MNFurs Election Committee, thank you for attending. We have 4 candidates this year. Only 3 of them were able to make it in today. Grumble had her questions taped yesterday. Today we have Rico, and Cynthia. Thank you all for joining us. Candidates will have 2 minutes to answer each question. After a series of 10 questions, we're going to have a 15-minute break. After those questions are answered, we have writing questions from our live studio audience. And yeah, I think we're good. Let's get started.
All right, so go ahead and I'll start things off. So we'll kind of make the order, or the order for how we ask, just round for each candidate. So let's start with Rico. So Rico, first question. What do you think MNFurs' role is in providing an environment for youth in the community?
Great. Well, I mean, I guess I'll kind of go back to how I was introduced into the fandom, because it was also the same deal. It wasn't directly on MNFurs, but the way that I see MNFurs being filling that role is a good spot for new people into the fandom to kind of understand it better, both for people that are partaking as an interest in the fandom, as well as parents that want to learn more about the fandom. I think it's a great outlet for information for that to be kind of shared and learned about, as well as having a space where youth and teens and pretty much all ages can meet others that also have a similar interest in the same interest group. So it's a nice place to have that outlet, because there's other places that don't have that focus on specific interest groups. So I think that's where MNFurs kind of falls into that category.
Same question. Cynthia, what do you think MNFurs' role is in providing an environment for our youth in the community?
Well, like Rico said, it's a great place for kids and teens to find out about furry fandom, but also this fandom has gone through multiple phases already in generations, and I always see that it always comes up as a younger generation. Now the teens are looking at how they're identifying themselves in that, and I think furry fandom, or MNFurs in particular, is good about supporting teens and being able to allow them to grow and explore things. And with our partnerships, like with GPS, they have additional programs that they can get more exposure to things that they may not get through their school or their social groups. We've had some teens that have been in the program now for a few years, and we watch them be very not social, not very engaging, to being leaders within their own group and in their own communities. And I think it's really useful using the furry fandom aesthetic of having create your own character, so you can allow yourself to experiment and not be a little bit separated personally from their personal versus their persona, and they can go out in that persona and explore and experiment without it being so close to home in their own personal mind thoughts. So and if we can continue to do that for teens, I think it's all the better, because I know what my teenage years were, and there was nothing like this for me, and I want to make sure we have something for our teens, and it's our legacy.
Okay. Finally, Euro. What do you think MNFurs' role is in providing an environment for our youth in the community?
Well, what I would say is that it provides youth with a place to go to interact with other youth who may have similar interests, both within furry as a fandom, but also outside of that, with other youth who may have similar issues with them in their daily lives, and also for older individuals in the community to also give the youth a source of, say, inspiration or a role model to look up to, things like that, and also for the youth to participate with other youth in any of the youth-centric events that we hold, and also with the convention itself. I know there's a lot of programming in the convention itself, and that also provides a place where youth can interact with others.
All right. Before we begin our next question, just a quick memo since I forgot to mention it. Since this year we don't have a timer set up in front that you can look at, when we get to the 1 minute mark, I will hold up my phone so that people can see we're at 1 minute, and again at 30 seconds, and again when you get to 10 seconds.
Awesome.
All right, next question. We're going to begin this one with Sim.
Right.
With other organizations such as GPS, MFF, MA Twin Cities, and more, how should MNFurs provide our services?
How should we, so if, just to clarify the question in my head, you were talking about if Minnesota Furs was standing alone, how would we proceed? Is that what that question is? I'm sorry, I didn't understand that.
More like how we should be collaborating with
Collaborating, okay, sorry, I didn't understand that. Well, for GPS, I've been actually working on a project for the last 6 months where we renegotiated the strategic partnership agreement with them, with GPS, and how our roles work back and forth. Again, one of those things is working with teen programming and opening up their programs for our teens and doing things like that. But beyond teen programming, you would have, in that same contract, we're talking about having kind of a Minneapolis Twin Cities leadership roundtable, kind of like how we have the furry roundtable, like that's led a lot by MNFF, sorry. But I've been trying to grow our partnerships here within the Twin Cities so we can not have to reinvent the wheel for each group, that we can all share knowledge and be that much further ahead, so we don't have to make connections and things like that. If we all have a source book for the same things, that we can share resources, possibly save ourselves both time and money, and possibly resources of volunteers. I know we have at the convention, we have some of the convergence operations people that help us out, and just having a collective, and then they go across over into Anime Detour, and just trying to make those partnerships and those foundations so we have more resources. Because one thing we find is that, for instance, with Anime Fusion, they also had a horrible time the last 2 years with their volunteers, kind of like our situation at convention. Maybe together we can come out with some sort of plan to fix that.
Okay. Euro, same question. With other organizations such as GPS, MFF, MA Twin Cities, and more, how should MNFurs provide our services?
Well, what I would say is that there is more to a fandom than just your own organization. I believe that we should at least start talking to other organizations, and then through increased discussion, we can share not only resources when it comes to things like legality and also operational aspects, but we can also share these are some of the difficulties and roadblocks that we have come across, and how other organizations have tried to get around or address those roadblocks. We can also take a look at other organizations to see if there are certain instances that they have come across and problems that they have come across, so that we can avoid having to running into the same problems as well. That's something that I would like to see more of, not only with our local organizations, but maybe other fur organizations from out of state as well.
Okay, Rico. With other organizations such as GPS, MFF, Anime Twin Cities, and more, how should MNFurs provide our services?
I agree entirely that the fandom is in no way in competition with other groups, organizations, or conventions. That there's, without a doubt, some partnerships that can be made there, both in terms of, like, for immigration. I know that we work with another local convention to help provide volunteers and equipment both ways. And I actually experienced that firsthand with Anime Fusion. They were really struggling with volunteers to the point where they're outreaching to us for assistance. And I know personally I had taken the weekend to go and help with that. So and not limited to just equipment or volunteers or anything. I definitely believe that should be promoted, as well as also working in collaborating with other conventions to find out what worked best for them and what didn't work best for them. I don't know if I've ever been to a convention that's done everything exactly right, so I definitely believe that there should be more working together, both with conventions and also other furry groups, other small groups like Minnesota Furs that does bowling meets or does a bingo night. I don't know, just to name some examples of what events bring people in.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question. We'll start with Euro. What is your understanding of your fiduciary responsibilities if elected to the board?
Well, I'm in a bit of a special situation here, mainly because of what I pursued while I was in college and what my current job is. So the big restriction is I cannot touch the finances when it comes to MNFurs, and I have to remain a neutral party. What I see is how am I able to fulfill my duties as a board member, both from a legal aspect for the not-for-profit, and also how can I adhere to my position in my job as well. To sum it up, essentially, know what my duties are when it comes to a specific situation on the board, but also know when I have to step aside and know that I will, even though I may want to step in, I have to keep my balances both to both places.
Okay. Rico, what is your understanding of your fiduciary responsibilities if elected to the board?
I understand that being on the board, it's pretty much the board's responsibility to address any issues that come up, legal or non-legal, and knowing to what limit we could actually fulfill those legal duties, and if anything extends past what we are capable of course, researching other alternatives and resources to help us deal with any legal issues that may come up. But definitely anything that comes up as being a board member, entirely aware that that is a responsibility of the board to fulfill any issues that come up. It's not kind of one of those things where it's like, well, it's not our problem, we have to just let someone else take care of it. It's if it involves Minnesota Furs directly, then it definitely is the board's responsibility.
Okay. And Sim, what is your understanding of your fiduciary responsibilities if elected to the board?
If I'm elected to the board with the various things that would happen with fiduciary responsibilities as a board member and or an officer, that we have to know what we have to report to the state, both and to the federal government, and then as we talk about financial and legal issues, and knowing kind of like what Euro has in his own situation, knowing that if we have a conflict of interest that we need to step away from things and let the rest of the board work on that, and then make sure we investigate, if something we're not familiar with and that we haven't done before, and we have to check into legal matters and make sure that we're not crossing the board, or crossing a line with the board. Basically, the buck stops with the board. The board has to be accountable both to government and to our society. So we're elected by the community to be their voice and make sure that we are holding the organization to a legal standpoint that should be for a nonprofit, and that is his own thing, knowing where we have to be as a nonprofit, and not, for instance, we are an educational basis, and that we cannot go into political matters, for instance, as this is an election year for our president, that we know we need to stand aside and not be involved in that, because we could lose our nonprofit status over that, for instance.
Okay, this next question is going to be from Rico. From an outside perspective looking in, what do you feel are, if any, current issues that need to be addressed by the MNFurs board?
Issues to be addressed by the MNFurs board, current issues. It's a great question. Some diversity in events. I know it's not really a huge issue, but just exploring new avenues for events that would maybe cater to youth, cater to different sub-interest groups of the furry fandom, tabletop gaming, video gaming, other more artwork kind of eccentric things, as well as other issues that need to be addressed by the Minnesota board. I would like to see some improvements upon different resources that are available to like parents, making documentation available to what the fandom is, how to support your youth with this interest of the fandom and understanding exactly what it is, as well as some other resources that are currently made available by the Minnesota Furs. I'd like to see a little bit more improvements on the website. I think there's a lot of potential with the website since that's a kind of the first stepping ground for people to get a first impression of Minnesota Furs is the website. I think it's great as it is, but it can definitely be improved upon. Otherwise, I definitely know there's some other issues that need to be improved upon. And of course, then if any issues do come up, being a board member, or listening to the community and hearing what people believe that needs to be improved. As a board member, I'd be all open ears.
Okay. Sim, from an outside perspective looking in, what do you feel are, if any, current issues that need to be addressed by the MNFurs board?
For me, and this has always been an issue for a long time, is that for our board, it's a working board, and there's this perception that board members have to run all the events, and I feel that there's a happy medium between a working board and a managing board, and I think if we can try and grow some staff on the MNFurs side, I mean, we have a fair amount of staff in the convention, and maybe some of our talent has gone over there, but to try and expand our staff within MNFurs board, because the people, if you look at who's running the events most of the time, it's a board member. That's great, but there's other things behind the scenes that they're doing besides running events, and if we can get somewhere between them running a couple events and getting some staff in that they keep an eye on and that report to them and run some things. I mean, Rico's talked about doing some other events. I mean, things for if someone would want to organize like a pub crawl or a progressive restaurant meal tour. There's lots of things out there, but the thing is, people have to come up with it. The board can't be responsible for everything. Everybody's got their own unique interests, and this is a community, and we should have 1,000 ideas. And I know in the past we've had problems sometimes moving that on, whether there was communication issues or whether it came down to something that was a legal problem, and trying to sort of suss through all that and figure out what we can do to make things more available.
Okay. Thank you. Euro, from an outside perspective looking in, what do you feel are, if any, current issues that need to be addressed by the MNFurs board?
Well, what I would say is that one of the shortcomings is that there is a disconnect between the MNFurs board and certain members of the community, and also certain subgroups within the community. I believe that there is a misunderstanding as to what the board is able to do and what the board is not able to do, along with how the board is run, how the board is structured, things like that. Mm-hmm. I think that if there is a way that we could tell the community, or at least better communicate with the community, and clarify, this is what the board is, this is what the board is not, this is what the board can do, this is what the board cannot do, and this is what the goal is of the board, and then have a better connection with the board and the community. That would clarify a lot of things and strengthen the community as a whole.
Okay. Next question, and we will actually start with you. Based on answers given by candidates in the previous question, what are some solutions to help alleviate those issues?
Well, what I would say, I want to build on a comment that Rico made about the website. And this is something that I would like to focus on if I am elected as a board member, is that I feel that the website has a lot of shortcomings. I believe that there is information on the website, but personally, I do not like how the website is laid out, and also there is a lot of information, but that is the problem. There's too much information out there, and it all gets cluttered about, and I think we should, at minimum, do at least a cleanup, or at maximum, do a complete redesign. Take a look at the website, take a good, deep, hard look to see why is the website laid out like this? Why are certain aspects here? And do we need other certain aspects? I know there are legal reasons why certain parts of the website are there, but I believe that there has to be a way to still still adhere to those legal constraints, but still have a much better website to greet people with. Again, first impressions are everything.
Okay. Sam, based on answers given by candidates in the previous question, what are some solutions to help alleviate those issues?
Oh, since we're all talking about the website, I've talked about that it needs a redesign, and people have already suggested that. Part of this is I feel that we need to survey the community, because that's how we got the website we have currently, is that these were the needs of the community at the time to communicate out. Well, things have changed. It's been almost 8 years, 10 years since we've built that site, and so it's time to change it. Let's see what the community feels it needs to be, and build it towards that. And I know I've had a discussion where we have pretty much everything possible that is MNFurs on that one website, and there's been talk about, well, do we break the community stuff off and then just have an MNFurs like operational website where it goes through all our forms and all that to help make it a little bit easier to find things. And there's things to look at with that. Also, I'm talking about how communicating with the community. I would like to try and get back into doing some more community meetings that we used to have years ago, because I feel we're disconnected from the community as a whole. I mean, this fandom, you end up getting your herds and your packs and your cliques. The board becomes its own clique just out of necessity because they work together, and now because they've run programs, they're even more together. And if we can try to get the community back involved a little bit more, I think we'll have more connection and more know what the pulse of the community is in real time.
All right, finally, Rico. Based on answers given by candidates in the previous question, what are some of the solutions to help alleviate these issues?
I'm not going to touch base on the website because I feel like Sin and Euro touched base on that pretty well. I agree with their points pretty much verbatim. But the touch on the other points, I really said and took the words out of my mouth, engaging the community a little bit more, getting their input, because it's not all about what we think that the community should be. It's definitely what the community thinks the community should be. So getting outreach, doing a survey, understanding exactly what people feel like we're doing right and what we're doing wrong, and also to touch base on the other problem that I also agree with that needs to be addressed is working with the community a little bit more for resources on how to run events. I agree 100% that the events from MNFurs should not be entirely board ran. We don't know what everyone wants to do or what everyone's interests are on a weekend or a weekday. So if somebody says we should do a pub crawl, that's great. Let's work together and let's see what MNFurs can do to help you make that happen. Help leverage our resources, Twitter, the website, the forums, and whatever other social media I'm missing to really work with the community to help them build these events.
All right, Sam, this next question is for you. what are your plans for educating the public on MNFurs from the perspective of our organization existing, what we provide our community, the general public, etc.?
Well, that would be multifold. Of course, if we're doing a website design, trying to identify, so what are MNFurs, what does this mean to the community, how we interact at different age levels, and how we support the community. I also want to try and get like a little community meeting interaction going back at Ovals, so we have so many people there, possibly working with teens a little bit more about working for social civic service within the Furs. I mean, we're a community that doesn't charge a fee, just so we can be all inclusive, but there you take the monetary value out of that and you look at what people can do to volunteer and all that. And I think like for our teens, they get to learn that a little bit more and be part of their world as a whole. And then possibly reaching out to general public, trying to find avenues to reach out with press releases and all that, and trying to engage some of the local media so we can take the stigma away from furry a little bit more and show that we're just people who happen to like animals, not all the other things that tend to be involved with it all the time. So that would be it.
Okay. Rico, what are your plans for educating the public on MNFurs from the perspective of our organization existing, what we provide to our community, the general public, etc.?
Great. Well, of course, there's the website. Also, things that aren't being used as much as they should be, like in Minnesota Furs YouTube channel, to create some resources with video and other means. Another thing that I really think that we should dip our paws a little bit more into, is communicating and educating what Minnesota Furs is through other conventions. I know that Anime Fusion, we had a room, and that was great for people that swung by and wanted to know more about what Minnesota Furs is and furry migration. So I want to keep it short. I think that would be it.
Okay. Euro, what are your plans for educating the public on MNFurs from the perspective of our organization existing, what we provide to our community, the general public, etc.?
All right. Well, I do know that there is a panel at Furry Migration where we educate the public and people can come, attendees can come to get an idea as to what MNFurs is and what we are about and what we do. I'd like to participate in that, and I'd like to see that expanded more. I do also like, I also have mentioned the idea of, well, why not also have a panel at Furry Migration to do more? This is how you run an event, or these are some of the things that you should think about before you start wanting to run an event. Otherwise, it would just be more outreach, more communication to the general public, and always have just a general answer as to, this is MNFurs. We are MNFurs. This is what we are about. This is the community that we are, and hope to just organically get more outreach, both within Minnesota and also to out of state.
Okay, thank you.
All right, next question, we'll start with Sin. In this new era of inclusion where the old norms and behaviors in society are not acceptable, how are you going to make MNFurs be more inclusive? As an example, how will you get more people involved from all walks of life?
Well, it's getting out and asking people, do they know anything about Minnesota Furs? Asking if they want to participate. I think that is one of the things that we're running into problems. We're a group, we're at a status quo, and we don't go out and look at new people and talk to them about it. I mean, how many people have you talked to recently who don't know anything about it? If we get the random person who shows up at an event, it's almost like hot potatoes for some people. They don't want to engage until it falls to one or two people. And I think as a whole, we have to work to engage and present our fandom in a positive light, and show that we're non-threatening, show, we have all this diversity for people to engage in. I mean, we're a very artistic fandom, and we're in all the different mediums, fursuiting, art, music, video, all kinds of things. And then going and participating in other conventions and things like that, which, we have such a wide range of conventions in the metropolitan area. And I know I go to 3 or 4 of them, but there's like 30 here. I don't know how far out we go, but I mean, everybody has an interest. So just going out, and then even within our fandom, going into getting out of your comfort zone and talking to other groups and other subgroups in the community. Just because you're comfortable with one thing doesn't mean you can't go and say, hey, can you tell me about this thing that you people do? And just talking to people. And I don't think we do enough.
Good. With this new era of inclusion, where the old norms and behaviors in society are not acceptable, how are you going to make MNFurs be more inclusive? As an example, how do you get more people involved from all walks?
From other walks of life. I would say, be more open, and then get out of our comfort zone, and then try to expand what we are about. I think there's a general perception amongst some people right now that we are only catering to certain groups and then excluding others. I feel that, especially within our state, that there are individuals who are either less engaged or fully disengaged with MNFurs as an organization, and I believe that if we can at least re-engage them and then tell them, would you be willing to give us a second look if we try and change a little bit of who we are, and then organically that will start opening up doors, opening doors back for both those community members and also expand beyond that.
Finally, Rico. With this new era of inclusion, where the old norms and behaviors in society are not acceptable, how are you going to make MNFurs be more inclusive? As an example, how do you get more people involved from all walks of life?
Great. So definitely taking a step back and viewing from an outside perspective of how Minnesota Furs represents itself to the public, making sure that people are aware that it's not all just about fursuiting, that there's other interests, like Sin said, artwork, writing, tabletop gaming, music. No matter what your interest is, just because you don't own a fursuit doesn't mean you can't be involved with the Minnesota Furs, or even the furry fandom in general. I want to touch base again on what we talked about earlier with Minnesota Furs is not exclusive to itself. It's not in competition with other groups. So definitely making sure that that's expressed as well. But yeah, just touching base on what Euro said, because I was going to mention the same thing, is reaching out to those that don't really involve themselves with our picnics or our meetups or our Zubu or whatnot, understanding exactly what's holding people back from our events and convention, whatnot, and find out exactly how we can improve as a board or improve as an organization to bring everybody in to make sure that everyone feels accepted and welcome.
Okay, next question, we're going to start off with Euro. Nonprofit groups require funds to remain operational. What is your proposal on ways to provide more revenue streams for MNFurs?
More revenue streams for MNFurs. Well, what I would say is I'll go into this with, say, the holiday party. I know that the holiday party this year we have expanded quite a lot. Same with our picnics, and what I would say is that we need to take a look at to see perhaps is there a way to increase revenue streams there, try and push sales of like merchandise or things like that. I know there are badges for sale. I also know that for the oval meets, for instance, there is a little box in there in the Oval Meets for requested donations. But I know one of the things that we have been struggling with the Oval Meets is how do we make them profitable? Because of course the room does cost money, and the thing is, it's more. I don't think we do a good enough job to tell individuals, look, to hold these events, it costs money to reserve the rooms. We'd appreciate it if you could help us offset the costs. We don't need to be, I'd say we don't need to be profitable, but if we can at least start stemming the losses, that would be a start.
Okay, Rico. Nonprofit groups require funds to remain operational. What is your proposal on ways to provide more revenue streams for MNFurs?
I'm actually going to tweak the question a little bit and see what Minnesota Furs is doing to remain in the black. Reassess all of our different events and make sure that the events that we're bringing in revenue through is offsetting the entire cost, like Euro said, to cover the space for like the Oval. And then from there determine exactly where we stand financially with those events, how far we need to go to extend those revenue streams. I'm not going to be able to answer this too much deeper because I'm not totally understanding of the current Minnesota Furs financial standing, but definitely if elected on the board, that would be one of my focuses.
Okay, Sin. Nonprofit groups require funds to remain operational. What is your proposal on ways to provide more revenue streams for MNFurs?
That has always been the question for this group, and it seems like when I've seen over the years being on the election committee myself, it's so hard because our picnics are usually at public parks where we can't charge a fee. We do badges, and luckily people support the badges to help offset our costs for the picnics, and they'll give some donations, but also it's hard. Some parks we go to, we can't even sell merchandise at, so trying to generate income at those areas, it's very hard. This last year with the holiday party, I mean, it was very successful and very overcrowded. And looking at possibly making, if we have to change venues because the venue, if we go there again next year, my concern is we're not going to be able to house everybody there, and we'll have some other issues. So that means we have to look at a new revenue or new space in which we're going to have to generate revenue. How we do that could be a bunch of different ways, but what's going to be successful in the community is the other question. And that's a lot of this is balancing making things accessible for people yet still covering the costs of it. Part of it again is talking about this with people and saying, you know, you're not paying a membership. We don't ask you to pay a membership, but we ask you to help support us, and making sure we're pointing out that donations help keep these things free and available to people. And if you don't have $5 this time, that you give $10 the next time you come, or work with things like that. And then, are there opportunities for merchandise? Sure. We just have to have the key people to do that, because merchandise is a hard thing to do in all reality, to find something that you're not going to sit on because people don't like it. So.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Next question. I'll start with Rico. If elected to the board, how will you handle yourself publicly when and if approached by the general public wanting to know more about this?
Yeah. So I like to believe that I have a pretty good understanding of what the furry fandom is in terms of an interest group. So, I mean, that happens even now, even not being on the board, being approached by someone asking, what is this all about? Just explaining what the furry fandom is, explaining what Minnesota Furs and how they stand in that interest group, as well as providing resources for them to learn more. It would be great for people that don't understand what the fandom is to go to Minnesota Furs website and have a better understanding faster than it is right now from the landing page to understand what we are and what we do. Yeah.
Euro. If elected to the board, how will you handle yourself publicly when and if approached by general public wanting to know more about this?
Well, if I'm elected to the board, what I would say is carry myself professionally as much as possible, and then also just have a general response to common questions that I believe will be asked of me. Give a general overview as to what the furry fandom is, what are certain aspects of it, and also give a general overview as to what MNFurs is as an organization, some of the events that we hold, and what we are attempting to do. Also provide the website to just show, to just give a couple of options to those individuals who are interested in learning more about what the furry fandom is.
And finally, Sam, if you're elected to the board, how will you handle yourself publicly when if approached by the general public wanting to know more about this?
Well, and like others have said, that we've run into this already, and one of the best ways is to find out, if it's a parent, what are their concerns, and talking to them about that. Finding out what their children are interested, or just another person, finding out what their interests are, getting them a basic rundown of what we do and who we are, and then trying to find someone some member of the community with those interests. If it's a parent who has a question, find another parent at a picnic or at a meet and have them talk, because there's nothing better than having another parent talking to another parent about what their concerns are, because they've gone through all those things themselves, and now they can tell this new parent, no, it's okay, this is what it's about, and this is my child. And sometimes the kids hang out, but we've also had a parent whose daughter was very much into art. We introduced her to one of our artists at a picnic, and they got on amazing and found out what amazing work that they were doing. And just getting those connections together, and so people can see who we and what we are.
Okay, this is the final question before a break. Sin, if elected, what are some of your goals that you want to accomplish with the organization over the next 2 years, and why?
Well, kind of alluded to this earlier, is that I want to try and get us to closer to a managing board than where we're at right now. Because we talk about clicks and all that, and I see the board and the people that help with the board are a very strong group, and they hang out together so much because of the work. And it becomes a perception, all these people don't want to do anything and they're not collected. By the time everybody's done with the stuff they're supposed to be doing or trying to get done, they don't have any time left for the community to interact with people and all that. I want to get us more staff or get more people involved, so there's a greater range of experiences and outreach to the community, because inadvertently kind of closed off. And I would like to see us get away from that model. That's the biggest thing, is getting more staff, more volunteers. So.
Rico, if elected, what are some of your goals that you want to accomplish with the organization over the next 2 years, and why?
Sure, yeah. So just to recap kind of off of my other answers throughout this debate so far is building upon Minnesota Furs and having the events be more community driven and not just board driven. Hopefully that will spark a little bit more diversity in the different types of events that we can offer in partnership with the members of our community. And two, improving our resources available to the public through multiple different mediums, website, YouTube, Twitter, and those would be my 2 primary goals, as well as finding out exactly what is working for Minnesota Furs and what isn't working for the Minnesota Furs in terms of spaces like the Oval and the picnics. Reassess those needs, and especially when it comes to generating that revenue, to make sure that it's at least breaking even.
Okay. And Euro, if elected, what are some of your goals that you want to accomplish with the organization over the next 2 years, and why?
Well, I mentioned this more in the responses that were provided on the website. The first thing that I would like to focus on is the website itself. I believe, like I said previously in this debate, is that I think the website could use a thorough looking over. I think there is a lot of information on the website, but the problem is that it is overwhelming, and oftentimes the information is difficult to find within the website itself. I think there are parts of the website where I'm not sure why those parts of the website are there, and if those parts are not necessary, to either get rid of them for the parts of the website that are needed, take a look to see is it working, and if it's not, make it better. The second thing that I would like to focus on is more outreach, not only within our community itself to try and bring in more members of the community, but also to other, not only fur groups from out of state, but also other organizations within the state of Minnesota that we currently work with right now. Some examples, as other candidates have said, GPS, Animate Twin Cities, things like that. I think if we pool our resources together, we as a community would be much stronger and better off in the long run.
All right, we've reached the halfway point of the election committee's questions. We'll now take a 15-minute break, and we will see you all back here after the break. All right, welcome back. Let's get started with the next question.
Okay, this one we will start with Rico. Fur migration is a charity event that runs under MNFurs. It is designed to run mostly as an independent event with board members, staffing, as well as other senior staff positions. How do you see the validity granted by the charter?
Can you repeat the question one more time?
Sure. Fur migration is a chartered event that runs under MNFurs. It is designed to run mostly as an independent event with board member staffing, as well as other senior staff positions. How do you see the validity granted by the charter?
I don't know if I'm understanding the question. Can it be phrased in a different way?
Okay, let's see. So, basically, with the fact that the charter grants, MNFurs basically has free migration set up as a chartered event where it acts semi-independently, but at the same time it has board members that are staffing senior staff positions on free migration. So we're just asking for if you see like if there are any issues with that in terms of the separation between organizations, if you believe that's an issue or not an issue, and
Gotcha.
elaborate to that.
Okay, cool, thanks. So I don't see any issues with that, and honestly, I'm kind of new into that whole perspective of it. From this perspective, I do believe that free migration shouldn't be Minnesota Furs' primary focus. That Minnesota Furs definitely has a lot more going for it than just the convention. As it stands at the moment, I don't see any issues between the relationship of the two entities.
Okay. You're right. Fur migration is a chartered event that runs under MNFurs. It is designed to run mostly as an independent event with board member staffing, as well as other senior staff positions. How do you see the validity granted by the charter?
Well, what I see is an organization which runs an event, and then the charter just establishes that relationship and says, these are the things that you can do, these are the things that you cannot do. And I believe that if furry migration were to want to do something and there was, say, confusion as to whether it is allowed or not in the charter, then it would be more of a, it would have to be consulted with Minnesota Furs as the organization. And also, if Minnesota Furs believes that furry migration is trying to do something or is doing something that is outside of the boundaries of the charter, that's when Minnesota Furs would have to step in to say that this is not acceptable, or this is what you can do based on the goals of what your original actions were to try and make it so that the goals are reached, but yet adherence is kept with the charter.
Sin. Furry Migration is a chartered event that runs under MNFurs. It is designed to run mostly as an independent event with board member staffing as well as other senior staff positions. How do you see the validity granted by the charter?
I see the charter as having a bit of vagueness in this point, and what Euro said applies, but more when you're on site at a convention, if you have every board member in a senior position at the convention as well, which is again supposed to be semi-autonomous from MNFurs, if a legal matter comes up and you need a decision that gets elevated from con-chairs to board members, now you have a conflict. If every single board member is in a department that's affected by this conflict, you have no way to break that tie, to make unbiased opinion about something. If we have to go to the police, if we have to go do something, you now have everybody involved in that and no clear path to a decision for legality reasons. So in my opinion, and this is actually a position I'm going to take, I've always said I'll either be high leadership in the convention or high leadership in MNFurs. This year I'm mostly stepping back from the convention. It's been time and I wanted to do this for a while. As a result, if I am elected to the board, I'll be free of any of those kind of issues, and hopefully nothing arises to that effect, but I just see that as a potential problem in the future, and maybe we need to look at our bylaws a little bit and the charter and maybe have someone who is independent from everything, can make those calls, and then keep us in a better legal standing.
This next question, we're going to start with Euro. With our repeated events that happen year-round, is there anything you see that needs to be changed with these, and why?
Is there anything that needs to be changed with these? Well, what I would say is that we do a good job with those events. Those are very, they bring in the biggest crowds, not only within Minnesota, but also from out of state. And as a whole, from what I know, they are well run and very profitable. But I would say one of the big concerns is that itself. They are large events. They seem to be growing, and it seems that if you have continued growth, you will strain both the venue itself. You have fewer venues that can accommodate all of us. The cost goes up, and there are a lot more things to keep track of. So what I would say is that if we do continue to grow these events, we may have to take a look to see, reestablish and take a look at the staffing needs. We may need to have more staff to try and make sure that everything is under control, that things do not get out of control and nothing goes wrong. And if something does go wrong, we respond properly.
Okay. Sin, with our repeated events that happen year-round, is there anything that needs to be changed with these, and why?
I wouldn't necessarily say things have to be changed, but it's always good to review the process of which things go through. I mean, to always say that that's how we've done it for the last 10 years doesn't always mean the same thing. I mean, it's not an event, but we talk about the website, and it's 10 years old and it needs changes. So it should have been probably reassessed with qualified people earlier than this, but the same thing would qualify for events. There's always different ways of running things, and if we can find something that's more effective, costs less, various things, or a way to get new staff involved by changing things up, we should look into that and make sure we're being as effective as we can with those events. And just make sure that there's follow-up. And then with people that have these successful events, and if we deem that they're running it in a positive way, that we talk to them, and maybe we do little boot camps like we're talking about, training how to run an event. You have these people who are doing something successful try to get more staff or more people working on things and sharing experience instead of having someone try and figure it out on their own. It's not necessarily an MNFurs situation, but it seems to be a Minnesota situation. It's like, oh, here, go do this, and then not support them and then with resources to figure out how to do it, and they either sink or swim, and that's not fair to our people.
Rico, with our repeated events that happen year round, is there anything that you see that needs to be changed with these, and why?
Definitely taking a step back and do either a survey or, as ridiculous as it may sound, a focus group to understand what works for these events and what doesn't. I know there's a lot of consistency in the different locations that we do picnics and oval meets and whatnot, bowling meets. Maybe explore if we need to kind of change the location of these events so it's a little bit more accessible by more people than just the northern side of the cities. Living on the south side, I know for myself at least, from a attendee perspective, it can sometimes be a little bit far of a drive, but definitely understanding from everyone else in the community of what is and isn't working for these events.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next question. We will start with Sam. If elected, what would you do as a board member to explore new partnership avenues and expand MNFurs into new territory?
If elected to the board, or even if I'm not elected to the board, to be frank, I talked about this partnership agreement that we finally signed as of last week with GPS. That'll take effect in June. Talking about building a seminar or a weekend or something we've talked about at a convention level, but now I want to try and bring this to a society level. So we have MNFurs, Anime Detours Societies, Anime Twin Cities, Anime Fusion is Anime Quad Cities, getting these societies together for running these conventions and talking about what to do and what not to do, and then having that crossover between organizations and getting our name out to other groups through that, and just inviting everybody in the Twin Cities that runs some sort of convention or is a board of a convention, and trying to get everybody together so we can, have crossover. I mean, I've now been in this fandom for over 10 years, and I've just seen how some people are very happy with furs. Some people, we'll do a little bit of furs, we'll do a little bit of convergence, we'll do a whole bunch of anime. And some people slide out of furry completely, and it's a transitionary place, and we're all fandom, as Rico said. We don't want to say, well, our fandom's the best fandom. I just find that kind of repugnant, because everybody should have interest, and they're not all going to be in one box. So.
Okay, Rico. If elected, what would you do as a board member to explore new partnership avenues and expand MNFurs into new territory?
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, volunteering for Anime Fusion, I think, was a big eye-opener for myself. The fact that there's a lot of overlap with different fandoms. There's a lot more than people realize. Going to this other convention, it felt a lot like Furry Migration, but with a different focus. There was still the dealer's den, there was a con suite, there was main stage events. There was a lot of similarities. So I think continued focus on having a presence for MNFurs or Furry Migration at these other events, and exploring new different events out there that are local to us or not, having a presence there to raise awareness, because there very well potentially could be people going to an anime convention that has an interest in the furry, or has an interest in what the furry fandom could have to offer, and they are just not aware of it. And it's never a great way to meet new people, so that would be my objective.
Okay. Finally, Hero. If elected, what would you do as a board member to explore new partnership avenues and expand MNFurs into new territory?
Well, what I would say to that is, we should take a look at the existing partnerships to see what is going well, what is not going well. I think we should participate in events that are outside of MNFurs. Like the other candidates have said, we do have a presence with Anime Twin Cities. We have a room party with them. Also continue on with other conventions. Anime Fusion has been mentioned. I also think that we should engage with other fur communities outside of Minnesota, see how those groups are running events, and then engage with the individuals who are in charge of those groups, in charge of those events, and just essentially cross-pollinate, throw ideas around, because if you only engage with just members of your own community, there's only that much information that can be shared, experiences that can be shared. If you branch out to other groups, you can share a lot more experiences. Just talk to more people. Just introduce yourselves and start a friendship.
Okay, next question, Rico. With the age diversity in MNFurs, how do you plan to engage youth, teens, and also adults to become more involved in the community and to make a difference?
Yeah, definitely. So there's definitely been a big influx in youth attendance at the picnics, oval meets, and also furry migration. Trying to keep things separate from furry migration and Minnesota Furs. I think furry migration is doing great in terms of having different youth events at the convention for those demographics, but also extending those same resources to be available for youth for Minnesota Furs year-round. I'm sorry, for youth year-round is something that can be potentially improved upon. Finding out exactly what we can do to offer these different activities and events. Maybe have a youth-only kind of event, so youth can have a similar age group of people around them to kind of engage with, as well as having different youth focused things at the oval meets and whatnot. Honestly, it's something I haven't put a ton of thought into, but if elected on the board, it's something I definitely am aware of that is a lot of potential in, and there's a lot of avenues to explore.
Okay, Euro, with the age diversity in MNFurs, how do you plan to engage youth, teens, and adults to become more involved in the community and to make a difference?
Well, what I would say, I'm going to focus this on furry migration itself. Coming off of the past furry migration, I would say that there is a great, we've done a lot for the youth, and we have had youth-centric programming at furry migration and also youth-centric programming and activities year-round. But I believe that this past furry migration, there has been less focus on the older individuals who are in the community. So what I would say is, yes, we can provide resources for the youth, but also have other activities, especially within furry migration, that would appeal to those who are a little bit older in the fandom, both in, say, their teens, their 20s, their 30s, and beyond, because I believe that this, like both of you have said, this is a community with a large age diversity, and I don't believe that we should just focus too much of our resources on one age group without focusing on the other age groups as well.
All right. Sin, with the age diversity in MNFurs, how do you plan to engage youth, teens, and adults to become more involved in the community and to make a difference?
Well, I've always been a champion for teens within the fandom, and we've had people in the past that have been able to run the programming and be super involved. I mean, we had someone last year who was setting up all the panels and all that for teens at Furry Migration, We had an adult programming track, and then unfortunately the individual had to work, and I lost 3/4 of the programming for the adult track that year. And it comes down to finding people that want to provide content. I had someone who wanted a panel on baby furs. I didn't care if I care about the subject matter if it was presented in the proper way. No one I could talk to, and my group is small in that sense, no one I talked to wanted to have had any content or felt comfortable enough to talk about the subject. And it comes down to knowing what people have knowledge on, and being able to provide that in the community. We need people to step up, because people may want it, but until someone has some depth of knowledge on it, we can't provide it. It's just very simple. If you know something about it, you may not be the best person at it. Learn with the rest of us. Tell us what you know, and then if you want to continue providing content, we'll grow with you. It comes back to a very small group of people are expected to do all the programming, and it's like, I know this area, this person knows this area. There's a vast ocean between there, and it's kind of a shame, because there's a lot of things we can learn from each other, and we're just not tapping into that right now.
Okay, next question. We'll start with Euro. How are you going to engage community members to volunteer and help the organization at a greater capacity?
Well, what I would say is that what I would say is that we should present ourselves as an organization that people want to be engaged in, and then also listen to individuals who say they wish to help, and then put them in a role to help out, and also try and how should I say this? Listen to their concerns when something comes up. What I would say is that it's a bit of a chicken and egg situation right now, because I believe we have individuals who wish to help out, but then somewhere along the chain of command, that request gets lost or something like that, and then people fall off. So it's more of listen to individuals who wish to help, put out the message that we need assistance, and then organize to make sure that everybody is who wants to help is able to help and can contribute something.
Okay, thank you. Sin, how are you going to engage community members to volunteer and help the organization at a greater capacity?
Well, like what Euro said, listen and engage with people, but also it's asking people. I said that earlier. Is that we don't talk to people enough and say, hey, can you help me clean the tables at the meet so we can all go home, like 5 after 8 or whatnot. And it can be simple things like that. And then, just talking to people, hey, we need some help with some things. What do you do? Or can you help us out with this? I just don't think we're engaging enough. And also knowing what we need. We've tried both on a convention and on the society side for the last few years, trying to get descriptions of roles that are needed and all that. And sometimes those might be too high level and scare people off, but it's just, we need to ask people. I just don't feel like we're directly asking. We'll just kind of say it in one spot and not have meetings where people feel like they can come up and it'll be easy to talk to someone. So either we get distracted and we're talking in our groups, and it's the things that happen. And then that's when it comes off as being cliquey, and it's not intended to be that way at all, I don't feel. But it's just being engaged. It's just that my perception, and I could be better about it too. Working with the convention, I was very stressed, and I can't say I was always the most able to listen to people and what they're asking me all the time, but I think we have to be better about it. So.
Okay. Finally, Rico, how are you going to engage community members to volunteer and help the organization at a greater capacity?
Definitely communicating what our needs are and understanding what our needs are. Um, Looking back at oval meets, for example, there's been several times where I've left the oval meet and then halfway driving home, I'm thinking, wait, who's breaking down the tables? Who's cleaning up everything? It was more of a not being aware that maybe there is a need for that kind of help. So finding ways to communicate that better at a meet, either it be just letting people know when they're buying a badge, being like, hey, do you mind sticking around for a little bit after and helping break down some tables or anything, or leveraging. I don't even know if MNFurs has it. I'm sure they have a Twitter, but using that more of being like, hey, anyone that's at the oval meet today, if anyone's willing to stick around for a couple minutes after the meet is over to help us so and so, do that. But most importantly, just leveraging and understanding what our needs are and communicating those better to the community.
All right. Next question. This one is was left a little bit vague on purpose to try to get some different responses to it. We'll see if this works or not. It's very vague. So Sim, you get to start with a vague question. How would you handle a complicated task given to you by a community member?
Okay. Wow, that is vague. Certainly is. I guess it would depend on what the task was. If they're looking to get involved with the organization, I guess I would first try and find out what their interests are, what their background is, experience, and then try to see where that would fit in our organization, and then either go through our HR. And then go to the department head and just get them connected, and then monitor to make sure it follows through, because I think that's where we've had problems in the past, where people have put interest in and no one's followed up on it to make sure that communication had been finished. Complicated tasks. Another instance, oh, maybe I'm stealing somebody else's now, is someone wants to start a new event. We've had submissions on the website and all that, but sit down with them and make sure they understand what goes into running an event, what kind of things they have to think about when putting it together, try and see if there's any legal aspects or financial aspects we have to look at, and lay that out, have that submitted, and then probably help that along with whoever's Drake or whoever's in events right now to get it off the ground, and just monitor it. It's again, managing, making sure people are connected and being able to have the resources they need to do what they need to do within reason.
Euro. Same question. How would you handle a complicated task given to you by a community member?
Well, like Sin said, it would depend on what the situation is, but my general line of thought would be take a look at the situation itself and then try and break it down into a series of smaller tasks. Explain to that community member that these are the things that we are able to help out with, and these are the things that we are not able to help out with. Give that community member a list of resources, such as individuals to contact, and also tasks that he or she would need to do in order to accomplish that task. Also, keep in contact with that individual throughout the steps, throughout the process of trying to get that certain task completed, and to try and coordinate things, because I know that, like I previously said, sometimes the requests and the inquiries can get lost. Hope to try and guide the community member through the process of getting a certain task completed, because that community member may not understand what is all needed to finish that task.
Okay. And finally, Rico. How would you handle a complicated task given to you by a community member?
It sound like a broken record here. Entirely depends on the situation. But most importantly, if I feel that I am properly equipped myself to handle the task. The great thing about being on a board is you're not alone on it. There's other board members to approach and get their opinions on, or a second set of eyes on. And then follow through. If it's something that can't be addressed and resolved then and there, either it be an inquiry or a problem with a community member, making sure that the ball doesn't get dropped. I think it's definitely important, depending on the severity or the complexity of the issue, proper documentation of everything that's been going on with the task at hand, and making sure that, being a board member, we have a responsibility to make sure that if it's a problem that involves MNFurs directly, or if it involves multiple different people within the community, that it's a board member's responsibility to make sure that it's addressed, and not just something that gets dumped off to someone else. And then also knowing where our responsibilities should not go. If it becomes a legal issue, or if it becomes something that really is to the point where it involves some sort of legal action or police involvement, knowing that when those steps need to be taken. So that would be my answer.
All right, thank you.
All right, next question. We will start with Euro. How would you handle yourself when provided constructive criticism about how something is set up and ran within the organization?
Constructive criticism. What I would say to that is take a look at what had happened itself and take a look at the criticism that was provided, and then look at the criticism that was provided and then try and work my way backwards to see why was this criticism given to me, what had happened to result in dissatisfaction, and then take a look to see where the discrepancy lies. If it's something that we could fix, then take a look to see what processes need to be tweaked, and then also give a proper response to that individual. If it's something that is completely uncalled for, or we feel that or we feel that it's not something that we can fix, then I would say provide a professional response, and just word it as neutrally as possible, and still at least say thank you for the criticism, but unfortunately we're not able to acquiesce completely to your requests.
Rico, how would you handle yourself when providing constructive criticism about how something is set up and ran within the organization?
Yeah, definitely. So as a board member, I think I would take every piece of criticism seriously, because if it's a big enough of a thing to be approached about, then it's probably something that would need to be addressed. Not to steal what Euro said, but approaching the criticism, seeing if it's something within our powers to alleviate or improve upon. And if so, then see what it would take to improve upon the criticism. Again, it all depends on what the criticism is. But then again, if it's something that we can't handle, or if it's something that we can't resolve, then let it be known. But also working with the person that submitted the criticism of, that's a great idea. What would you recommend that we do to help to improve upon your criticism, and just get their insight on it? Because if they believe that there's something wrong with the way that we're doing something, maybe potentially they would also have some input of what we could do to improve upon it from an outside perspective.
Okay. Understood. How would you handle yourself when providing constructive criticism about how something is set up and ran within the organization?
Well, being the third person on this question, it's a pretty straight line, but some nuances on it. I guess it'd be talking to this person, taking the criticism, finding out what, if they have any thoughts at this point about what it could change about it, do the investigation as needed. Also include fellow board members or whatever level this is at, or whoever it affects, and look at it with that criticism, how we can improve it, and then go back to the person that made the criticism, because in the end we work for them, and so we need to figure out the best way to handle it, whether we can resolve it or if we can change something in the future, and just try to take that pain point away for that person, whatever that was in that event. Just making sure that everybody has a say that's involved and input into those things. I'm trying to think about it, and then seeing if we have to escalate it anywhere. I mean, if it's a criticism and it ends up becoming a legal problem, do we have to get a lawyer involved? You know, or do we need some sort of accountant involved? Things like that. Again, it depends on what exactly it would be, but making sure you have all the active parties involved is probably the best bet, and making sure that that person who first pointed it out is felt that they're heard and that we've come to some sort of end result that they are happy with as well, and making sure they're part of that process. So.
All right, so earlier on, a lot of your answers have kind of highlighted the diversity right now that we have in our community. And along with the diversity, there becomes some friction between different groups in that, with how diverse it is. So, Rico, what are your viewpoints on youth and teens in our community from the perspective of our events? Should we have them remain all-inclusive, meaning open to all, or try to segregate the youth and teen events?
That's a really good question.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking. And there's a time and a place where youth programming should be segmented. I think MNFurs for youth, for someone coming in from a youth perspective that has an interest in the furry fandom, having the MNFurs be a safe space, I think would be pretty important for them. I know when I was growing up, I was discovering the furry fandom when I was in high school. I don't think that was definitely the best place to express my interest in the fandom. If I had something like MNFurs as a resource back when I was first discovering the fandom at that age, I would have loved that as a resource. So looking back, I know I'm probably not really touching base on the actual question itself, but yeah, I think there's a time and a place where programming should be segmented from general programming and whatnot, and just assessing at what point should something be provided just for youth, and then also assessing the location of the event of what is it appropriate for it to be general for anyone to attend said programming, and then of course not to focus too much on youth programming, but also making sure that programming is being provided for all age groups. So not putting too much of a focus on youth programming, even though I do completely acknowledge that it is an important thing to acknowledge.
Okay, Sin, what are your viewpoints on youth and teens in our community from the perspective of our events? Should we have them remain as all-inclusive, meaning open to all, or try and segregate youth and teen events?
Well, I think we've segregated some events, and there's a point where you have to have that. I mean, let's be honest, say we're at our convention, for instance, we're over 1,000 people. There's a percentage that you cannot escape that are people that aren't nice for that particular age group, and so having segregated events is a safer place for them. And knowing which ones are which, that's sometimes hard to say, but we shouldn't have a teen picnic and then an adult picnic. I think that's a disservice to the teens because they're part of the community, and I don't think we should be pushing them off to the side and having them all by themselves because they're part of a community. How do they learn to be community if they're not part of it? And doing all teen events, I think, would be a great disservice to them. But again, I know some things like we have Wear Camp, and the teens desperately want to go on to camp. There's so many liability things that come up with taking teenagers to a park for overnight, and we as an organization are not at a level to deal with that. The Scouts have that, but they've had a structure in place for decades for something like that. We do not. We're still trying to make sure that we are going forward and within all the laws and regulations we have with teen events, and trying to make sure that they're safe. And like I say, camping is out, but I know in the past they've gone on hikes, they've gone traveling. There's been talk to take them out to a hobby farm for one of our artists, and knowing what our liabilities are and having that for them is great, but that's just probably brings up more cans of worms. But no, I don't think it should be exclusionary for the teens from everything. There's just have to be an appropriate timing.
Good. And Euro, what are your viewpoints on youth and teens in our community from the perspective of our events? Should we have them remain as all-inclusive, meaning open to all, or try and segregate youth and teen events?
I would say that it would depend on the event itself, because I know there are certain events that are centered towards the youth, and it only the youth and the teens can participate. But what I would also say is that there are also events that those individuals cannot participate in. Sin brought up Wear Camp. I know that the other candidates have also brought up things like pub crawl. Well, there are reasons why youth and teens are not able to go to those events. But would I say that we should have events that cater to each specific group? Well, I believe that there should at least be some events that are all-inclusive to try and bring everybody together as a community. I believe you two have brought up that the community is very diverse in terms of age spread. What I would say is we should have these big events that bring everybody together as a community.
Okay, next question. We will start with Rico. With the youth and teens in our community, what are the core values and responsibilities in your own words, and why?
Responsibilities as a board member, or can you read it one more time?
Sure. With the youth and teens in our community, what are the core values and responsibilities in your own words, and why?
Well, MNFurs being a 501c3 is education based. So definitely educating on what MNFurs can do with the furry fandom and whatnot. Staying true to what earns us our nonprofit status, I think, is important. I'm gonna leave it at that.
Euro. With the youth and teens in our community, what are the core values and responsibilities in your own words, and why?
Well, what I would say is that it would first, the first response would be to the laws of the state of Minnesota itself, and then below that it would be within the charter of MNFurs, and then below that it would be the mission statement of the youth program. It's like Rico said, we are an educational entity, and the focus, I would say, would be to provide education, but also provide beyond that, it would be provide them with a community that like they can belong in as a group.
Okay, and Sin. With the youth and teens in our community, what are the core values and responsibilities in your own words, and why?
Well, I agree with education, because that's what we're here for. It's to educate ourselves, educate teens, and make everybody better people, and so they can participate in the community and be good to each other, inspire each other, and there's so much that can be gained for people here, especially teens, by being role models for them for something that and we've had some teens that they had horrible school situations, and by being part of this group and with their partnership with other teens and being in that smaller community within MNFurs, that they got the support that they needed, and they were able to work their way through some very bad times and be very successful, and I'm not going to name any, or not going to describe anymore because I don't want to out them. But also, I think we should make sure we're a safe space. I alluded before that there are people in this fandom that may try and take advantage of teens, and we have to make sure they're safe. And listen to their concerns, listen to parents, and make sure that they feel like they are stable, they're safe here, and supported. But that also means they should be able to have fun. I mean, if you go to any of the Oval meets, I think they're having fun between the music, the dancing, and just having a time to hang out with other friends as furs. I think it's huge for them. And then back to community. I mean, I think we all agree that community is huge for us, for the teens, and to keep Minnesota Furs going into the future.
Good. This brings us to our final question from the election committee before we begin the audience questions.
Oh dear.
So for Euro, who's a volunteer in MNFurs that you are impressed with and why?
Who's a volunteer who I am impressed with? Well, what I would say is, let's see, the first one that comes to mind would probably be Augie. He is always willing to help out, always the first to jump up and say, yes, I'd be willing to do this particular task for you to make sure that something gets done. So he gets my vote.
Okay, Rico, who's a volunteer in MNFurs that you are impressed with and why?
I'm going to be that person that doesn't actually name any names because I'm impressed with all of our volunteers. It's so crucial for an event to either be Minnesota Furs or Furry Migration for volunteers to help make the events possible. There's so many different volunteers that I've met from working at Furry Migration or doing a picnic that there's way too many to name, and I don't want to pick favorites. So if there's any volunteers that are watching this, I mean, thanks everyone for what you've done to help Minnesota Furs be what it is.
All right, and Sin, who's a volunteer in MNFurs you are impressed with and why?
I very much agree with Rico and what he says, but I think we also need to go back. I mean, we're 10 years in, we are now looking at a board that will have none of the original board members on it for the first time ever. And we need to look at the people who got this 501c3 going, because that was a lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears. While I was not directly involved in that, I mean, there's a lot to go into. There's getting the 501c3 from the federal government twice. It's just, there's just a lot going on there. And then we have people that are going both sides, like Dee. Dee is the president of MNFurs right now. He does HR side on MNFurs, plus room parties, plus all these other things. Then he's the division head on the convention side. How he sleeps between what his real life job is and all the things that are required for that and do everything else. I mean, everybody does an amazing part. I mean, everybody, I mean, you, Eric, have put in a lot of years. Nurse has put in, I don't know how many hours. Drake's been with us from the beginning. I mean, it's just remembering the people who got it started plus the people that come on. Everybody is valuable, everybody is important, should be thanked, and I don't think we do that enough.
All right, that brings us to the end of our committee questions. Drake, if you would like to, one of our audience members has given us a small book of questions. Could you maybe review that? And I have a question from another audience member that I can ask. Okay, so let's start with Sin on this one. If elected, how would you connect the further MNFurs groups in the state?
How would I connect the further out MNFurs in the state? That's always been an interesting history for us. I mean, it depends on how organized and strong the leadership is in that local area. And I know we've offered to go out and help with occasional events with the proper timeline and all that, so we can make time to go out. We've have done it through the website, through forums and all that. We've invited people down, I believe. That I'm not as positive, but I would assume we would have invited people into our events, and then also just interact with them and to help them organize events in their area. I mean, we can't always go out there, but if we talk to them about how we've done things and give them the support that we can if possible, and so they can have the satellite areas and get things going for them and help support them as much as we can. So.
Okay. Rico, if elected, how would you connect the further out MNFurs in the state?
It'd be great because I would be going full circle on that one. I lived in how I first words English.
Hard.
How I learned about Minnesota furs is I lived in Fargo, North Dakota for a several amount of years, and while there were events out there, the stronger events were always in Minnesota. And once a year, we would always collect some of the local furs there and drive out here to spend a night and do a picnic. So cross-advertising our events to these different outside groups from the cities would be one great way to advertise that these events are happening, and whatever platforms they have, cross-promote. And the same for their events. We could promote their events as well through our platforms. But also to mention on what Sin mentioned, not to steal what she said, helping those communities with event planning and what works and what doesn't work. And if possible, if they're not too far, lending what resources we can to their events and making that happen for them.
Okay. And Euro, if elected, how will you connect the farther out Minnesota furries in the state?
Well, what I usually say to people is that there is more to life than, there is more to fandom than just where the community in which you are geographically located. One thing that helped me develop that sense is when I went to my first out-of-state convention back in 2011. What I like doing for myself and for my friends is take my car, get a group of people, and then drive to these out-of-state conventions. And what I'm thinking is, why not do that for some of these events that are further out of state? Get a group of people, get in the car, and just go to those events. Just because they are located in a different part of the state, in a different state, doesn't mean that you're closed off from participating in those events.
Great, thank you. Rick, have you had time to review the book?
Yes, so
The book.
one honest question I would ask, since this deals a lot with juggling multiple responsibilities, like for example, the society side, board side, convention side. So that being said, what do you plan to do about burnout to volunteers and help out for somebody that's already burnt out? Oh, so I should say. Let's start with Rico.
Yeah, that's a great question, because I know that that's a very, very real issue that even I believe not only our convention is facing, but several other conventions as well. And I believe that this is currently happening, but promoting and encouraging people to step out of their current departments and try something new, learn some new skills. I'm sure that a lot of people are currently staffing or whatever in different parts of Minnesota furs or furry migration that they're most comfortable in. And it's okay to step outside of your comfort zone and try something new and learn some new skills. That's my take on it.
Okay, Euro, what do you plan to do about burnout with volunteers and help out those that are burnt out?
Well, first of all, what I would say is to talk to them and to just hear from them what is causing this burnout? Why do you feel burnout? What would you like to do to try and address some of it? And then just start a dialogue with that. Also start a dialogue with them to try and encourage those individuals to focus on like a different area, have a better balance between the area of current focus and another area, sort of transition from one to another. I myself, I'm going through a bit of that right now, and one thing I'm going to try and do is, I used to focus a lot on photography. Now I'm hoping to focus more on the administrative side of things. So it's a matter of something that you've put too much time in and it's stressing you out. What I would say is take a step back and then start building up your focus in a different area. Maybe further down the line, when you've developed into the second area, ease back into the area that caused you burnout in the first place.
Okay. Grumble, what do you plan to do about burnout with volunteers and assist those that are different?
Based on working at Furry Migration, working at Convergence and all that, specifically at Convergence, I had a department head that was completely burnt out but felt that he couldn't leave the department. And in the end, I couldn't get him out because he felt it couldn't run without him. Based on that experience, that's when we start looking at support staff, trying to change out some of that dynamic so it makes it a little bit fresher. That they can be more supportive and take some of that burden off. Otherwise, making sure people know that there are other people, we can find someone else. You don't have to stay in something that you're burnt out and tired of. You know, you need something fresh. Frankly, that's where I was at the convention at some points too. Is that you're there because you know how to do it. You feel like you have to keep going at it, and it's a matter of doing a environmental scan of people that report to you, looking at them, engaging with them. And I think that's something that we lose track of when we get busy, is that we're not taking a health check of all our people and seeing where they're at, and seeing how we can support them. If we need to get them more support staff, if we need to move them out into something else that's fresh for them, like other people have said. And it's just trying to be more engaged.
Good. Euro. Trying to figure out how to word this super quick. Alright, what would you do for the larger furry community to make sure that MNFurs and furries as a whole are seen in a positive light?
Seen in a positive light. Well, what I would say is that there are certain aspects of the furry community that are not seen in a good light, and it's basically taking those perceptions and then working towards clearing them up or fixing them up or addressing them as soon as possible. What I would say is that once there is a poor perception of either the community as a whole or a certain aspect of a community, is that it takes much longer to fix up that poor perception. So what I would say is, whatever issues there are, whatever poor perceptions there are, you have to work at just addressing them, clarifying them, clearing them up, so that going forward people will have a better impression of the community as a whole.
Alright, Sin, what would you do for the furry community to see that MNFurs and furries as a whole are seen in a positive light?
I'm writing my notes. Well, there's a few things we can do. One of the things that we've done in the past and we haven't had the opportunity to rise lately is look for more positive press opportunities. Whenever we get something out there, we seem to get a little bit more influx and more people are aware of us. It's amazing. We've been here for 10 years and we still have people, even last year, say, oh, what? We have a convention in Minnesota for furs? They still don't know we're here. So obviously we need to be out in the press more. And then by that same regards, look for social media groups that we can join, that we can talk about our perspective of things and get a broader presence through that, since we haven't done a lot of that because we haven't had staff. Frankly, social media is a bear to keep it all going, and especially to do both a society and a convention that don't necessarily do the same thing. They may overlap, they may cross promote each other, but that's two separate groups, and that's still a lot of work. And then also maybe start a blog if we have somebody who wants to create a weekly, bi-weekly blog, or talk about the day in the life of furriers, all kinds of things, and just talk about how we're your neighbor and these are the things we do. We just happen to like animals, doing art things or fursuiting or whatever. But again, not everybody needs to have a fursuit to be a furry, because I think that's such a misnomer in society right now to do that. Oh, I want to be a furry, but I don't have a fursuit. You don't need a fursuit. It's not necessary. There's so much more. And then also, last thing is, it's kind of relevant to me, is going into colleges and having groups. They have anime clubs. You start something up with furry. I mean, they're always looking for student life things.
All right, and Rico, what would you do for the larger furry community to see MNFurs and furries as a whole shown in a more positive light?
I really like Sim's ideas. Those are really good. But also, there's things that we can do on the front of meets and whatnot, especially when our meets are in a public setting like a picnic. Making sure that the people that are walking by, that come by curious of why are there big fuzzy creatures running around the picnic, I don't usually see this here, making sure that it's explained correctly and it's not obscured in any way of what the furry fandom is and what Minnesota Furs is. And also making sure that at these events, that any of the community members that are attending one of our Minnesota Furs led events, that there's nothing inappropriate happening that would shed bad light on the fandom. So I would believe that would be a board member responsibility to make sure that everything is staying in line for what is and what isn't appropriate in a public setting such as a picnic.
Did you find any gems?
So next one we'll just do kind of a straight to the point, kind of honest question. This time we'll start with her. What scares you most about being a board member? Or what scares you most about being on the board?
What scares me most about being on the board? What I would have to say is not doing a good enough job and letting people down. The thing is that one thing that I learned in college that I didn't learn in the past is keep your expectations realistic. And I was the secretary for a long period of time, but never officially an elected board member. I've held off on this for a bit because I wanted to actually, I wanted to make sure that I could do the job that I am signing up for and be able to do it properly, so that I am not letting both myself down, but also to the members of the community. So I would say letting people down is something that still scares me.
All right, Sid. What scares you most about being on the board?
Letting people down, like he says, but right now in this day and age where perceptions get skewed so easily, I'm worried if we're going to get sued over something. I mean, we've been around, and we've had issues in the past that have led to police investigations and all that because of something that happened. I don't know those details. I just know they've existed. And that as a board we get sued because we made a decision that somebody didn't like, and in the end I think we're all level-headed enough to make the right decision, but it still means we might go to court. And it's just the nature of things nowadays in our society. That's really negative thing, but that honestly, I've gone through a lot of things. This is not my first rodeo on a board. I have been on a board for a Lions Club since 2003. I'm still a board member there. I've been on a board for another site or for Convergence. I've been around. I've seen a lot of things. I've seen people ask not to come back to conventions outside of MNFurs. I want to be very firm about that. I've seen things happen, and it's never nice. And it's having to take those kinds of actions against people in the community because they've overstepped the line, and whether it leads to legal or whatnot, it's just not a great place to be, and it brings the community down a little bit, and that's not where I want to see us be. So.
Dr. Rico, what scares you most about being on the board?
Two things actually. One thing primarily being that this is my first time running on a board for something, and I wouldn't have followed through with the nomination if I wasn't confident in my abilities to be a board member. So I know it's going to be a big learning experience, but I'm definitely not concerned that there will be anything that I'm not capable of learning or addressing, especially since there will be other board members on the team with me. But also the fact that being a board member and putting MNFurs first, that if there was ever a situation where it was a friend of mine or something that an issue came up with, of course I would put the board first and I'd put the organization first, but just the confrontation of somebody that I know of that's doing something wrong, having to address that with them. Not afraid to step up to someone that I'm close with and saying, hey, it's not right, let's not do that. But definitely, since that's a potential possibility.
Are there any other ones? Okay.
How much of that did you fill out?
Like a quarter of it.
It's not NaNoWriMo yet.
My God, that one's a whole page.
This one? Okay. Here we go. So I already forgot who the last person that started this was. I think you went with
Euro.
I was the one who started.
Okay. So Sin. What are ideas or thoughts that MNFurs can influence more events and activities by community for MNFurs?
What? What?
You read the last half of that one more time.
Very well.
It's too close for something else than currently or
Okay.
down, so I wouldn't say
Okay.
it's not a useful one.
Okay.
Because really, if you're looking at it, the question is, what is
Otherwise, I found one here we could always
go with that?
we could always do that, or there's one in there's one about frustrating. Okay, cool. We're not just gonna keep going and going and going. So you think this should be the last one, Drake, or?
We did, yeah.
Okay.
All right.
All right. So, sorry, Yoda, I might use all of your questions, but you're too thorough. We'll save them for next year, though. We'll on top.
Right.
Okay.
Or there'll be questions at the meet that we can answer in free form in front of everybody.
All
That's
right.
nice.
So, Sin.
Yes.
Okay. New question.
All right.
A lot of things can get frustrating when you're on the board. What are things outside of furry that help you to relax?
Well, honestly, before we started this, while we were setting up, I was doing needlepoint because I didn't want to stress out and get stage fright. So I just ignored the setup and just was focusing on needlepoint. But I make jewelry. I just have a lot of creative outlets. And if you read between the lines earlier in the questions, I'm probably going back to school this summer. So that'll be part of it too, because I am able to finally go into the public relations degree that I've always wanted to have. So school and arts.
All right. Rico, a lot of things can get frustrating being on the board. What are things outside of furry that help you to relax?
Well, like a lot of people, PC gaming is a big hobby of mine. Also dabbling in technology and weird technology, weird little handhelds and everything. Just collecting those is always fun. But yeah, it's always nice to just kind of shut yourself out to the outside world and hop on the computer and just lose yourself in a space game or a pirate game or something like that, and just do something else and just take a step away from everything. And yeah.
All right. Euro, a lot of things can get frustrating being on board. What are things outside of furry that help you to relax?
Well, one of the things that I have been doing quite a lot, and I continue to do this to try and relax, is travel. I play the frequent flyer game, actually, but I do like to go abroad, to overseas, to just expand my horizons, go to different countries, and then just see the sights. The other thing that I like to do, both in furry and also in anime conventions and also travel abroad, is photography. Just multiple aspects of it, just going out, wandering around, getting photos, wandering photography, and also at conventions, just to see all of the wonderful costumes, engage with the attendees, and then just go back to my computer, edit the photos, just to try and improve them up, post them up. It's something that I do to try and relax.
Okay, we've reached the end of our questions. On behalf of the MNFurs Election Committee and the greater MNFurs community as well, thank you for all of our candidates, for being here, for answering our questions, and just for running and being a part of the process. Without you guys, MNFurs would cease to exist, because we are one of those organizations where being on board is not a lifetime thing, and we constantly are looking for new people to get involved. So thank you for stepping up and for being a part of the process. Our final voting is going to be coming up at the MNFurs Oval Meet that is on March 22nd. We also have absentee ballots available. If you need one of those ballots, please contact elections@mnfurs.org.